And President Muhammadu Buhari has signed the new minimum wage bill after a long debate. But economic analysts say 30,000 naira minimum wage can hardly make up for the high cost of living of the average worker. Some analysts say people in the private sector may not benefit from the increase in public servants' wages, and to a large extent, business owners in the private sector cannot be forced to increase their workers' wages along with the public sector. In January this year, workers in South Africa have been entitled to a minimum wage of 20 Rand per hour, which translates to 3,500 Rand. That's about 88,000 naira based on a 40-hour working week. And Ghana also increased minimum wage to 10.65 cedis, and that's about 750 naira. Now, to discuss this, I have in the studio economic analyst Dr. Emeka Okengu. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Very, very interesting figures when you compare Nigeria, South Africa, Ghana, countries that we are supposed to match with. Looking at the minimum wage bill that has just been passed by the president, do you think it's the right time?
Well, talking about matching figures, why don't we also even look at the dollar exchange rate? Now and what it was probably in 2014. So you find out that you are actually earning less if you now start just opposing that figure against, the dollar value. And each time I talk about the dollar value, I had a program on your show when we were talking about dollarizing the Nigerian economy. It's not dollarizing. The Nigerian economy is actually predicated on the dollar. Okay, because you are not a productive economy. You are not even an economy that is operating what you call import substitution. But let's move away from that, very long conversation. I don't like minimum wage. I'd rather we have right wage. Okay? The moment you talk about minimum wage, you are now, it becomes some instrument of negotiation. Somebody now sits down and says, okay, 30,000 is its minimum. What do you mean by minimum? What's wrong with rights? Because you see, the moment you talk about rights, then you begin to talk about the concomitants of rights. And what are these concomitants? 1 is health, 2 is transport, 3 is education, 4 is housing. Are you just opposing these wages? People don't forget to remember that wages are supposed to be calculated against these indices. Your housing allowance, your transport allowance, your education allowance, if you may. And if you had a household of the minimum accepted in Nigeria of 4 persons, what it simply translates to is that what you're earning is 10,000 a month.
Okay, but of course, economic analysts have said that this might affect the inflation rate. There could be a rise in inflation rate, and some persons are saying that it has nothing to do with inflation rate.
Inflation based on what? Inflation based on what? You see, are you producing? Each time people use these words, we're going to be having inflationary rates and we're going to be having X, Y, Z. Now, first and foremost, what is the workforce of Nigeria and how do we pay them? Are we paying from taxes? Are we paying from borrowings? Now, what it is we've done in Nigeria in the past 10, 15 years, if you may, is that we are actually borrowing, to be able to fund our recurrent. You know why? Because we're not earning as a country. That should worry you. So that's why I'm saying that if we're going to be having this conversation against what you call your minimums, okay, I don't think we should just make it minimum wage. I think we should make it minimum standard of living so that we can begin to now make these calculations. And if we were to just oppose that, look at South Africa that you mentioned. You're talking about them calculating it in hours. Yeah. Do you know what that means? It simply means that a lot of these things have come into context. What are you going to be doing on an hourly basis? What is your value worth for every 1 hour?
But you would say that this, as against what we had before, 18,000 naira, the government, would you say the government has done enough to, upgrade the minimum wage to 30,000 naira?
What you had was wrong. You can't add more wrong on a wrong to get a right. Okay, you had no business having 18,000 as your minimum wage. You had a business having 18,000 that you could argue as your right wage. That's my point. So if you made it 60,000 and it was not based on any calculation, it will still be wrong. If you made it 100,000 and you actually didn't also tie it to indices, okay, tie it to verifiables, it will still not be right. So the argument I'm trying to make is that government has not done anybody any favor. Okay, government is not doing any worker any favor. Bible, Quran, all the holy books say a worker deserves his wages. And then you need to weigh or weight the wage that this man is earning against his, what he's contributing. So the first question will be, what does a Nigerian worker contribute to our economic growth to be able to now get him to now, qualify to get these wages? Are you doing them a favor? Is this a handout? Is this a stamp? So there has to be a conversation around our wage earning systems so that you are able to now decide, okay, fine, with this wage, your healthcare will suffer, okay? With this wage, your education systems will suffer. With this wage, your transport systems will suffer. Now, what do I mean by your transport systems or health systems suffer? It simply means that an average Nigerian who earns 30,000, who has 4 kids, is going to be bringing up illiterates. It's going to be bringing up people with a lot of health challenges. It's going to bring up people who are going to be very frustrated. That's the argument, that's the angle I want you to look at this thing from. By the time you start looking at it from the inflationary, what is going to be occasioning it, can we talk about ignorance in education and then the cost? When they say education is expensive, why don't you just oppose that against ignorance? Do you know how many criminals you can be able to, or you're going to be grooming in Nigeria because their parents can't pay for them to go to school? Is that a worry?
But the fact that the federal government has made this move in signing the minimum wage to ensure that the Nigerian worker has something to earn at the end of the month, don't you think it's the right idea?
I think it's the right thing. But I'm saying, okay, let me put it this way. I think it's good, but I don't think it's right.
So you want us to go to use the right
beautiful
instead of the minimum wage?
No, instead of doing something that is good, okay? Why don't we do? It's commendable, but why don't you do something that is right? Do you know what right will be? Right will be that you have taken into context, you have taken into consideration every other thing that needs to be put into, that decision you're going to be making. So that in working against it or working around it, you are now probably also now looking at it from the perspective of right sizing, okay, instead of downsizing. Do you understand what I'm saying? And in right sizing, what you're now going to be doing is to make certain that those who probably don't fit in somewhere else. They could fit into your public transportation system, which you're going to be investing money into. They could fit into your agricultural food production systems. They could fit into so many, and people will be very happy to actually give up on their jobs so that they can do something that is better. This is where you now have a holistic understanding of what the issues are. But we're in very quick hurries to be able to take a decision. I mean, Labour says to you, we have done calculations, the price of Gari is increasing in the market, the price of beans is this, the price of that is that. I think that's lame. What I think would have been more sustainable is for Labour to be able to say, listen, if you live 2 kilometers away from your work office, it will be costing you 30 or 40 naira to be able to get to work and back. Statistics 1. Fact. Okay? If you have to go to the hospital and you have to get XYZ minimum treatment, it's going to be costing. Fact number 2. Okay? If you have children who are under 16 or who are above 16, this is how much you're going to be spending to make certain they get basic education. Fact number 3. You put these facts together and say this is the right wage. You can now use minimum right wage. It will sit with me.
All right, no, but I quite buy your point of view. But if I would like to ask, the 18,000 naira that we've had over time, some states are yet to pay some of their workers, that 18,000 naira, which some persons have said it's little compared to what the economy is saying. So how do you think, even if the government had moved ahead to increase the minimum wage from 30,000 naira, how do you think the Nigerian economy can actually pay for that?
The Nigerian economy, it wasn't because the Nigerian economy wasn't functioning. That wasn't why the states weren't paying. It was because a lot of these state governors started buying cars that were bulletproof, started living lifestyles that they didn't need to. As a governor, what are you doing with 16 cars, all of them SUVs on the road? What are you doing with houses in every state capital of the world? What are you doing with Estacos? Why are you doing flying private jets? These are the things that take monies from the states. That's one. As a state government or state governor, what are you doing not looking at your agricultural sector, at your industrial sector, at being able to make certain that you had a real sector? I'm not talking about the private sector now, that functioned. If these governors or governments put in just a quarter of what they spend, okay, on their recurrent expenditure into developing their real sectors, they will actually, I can tell you, and I keep making this argument, Yobe State is seen probably as the poorest state in Nigeria, right? But Yobe State is endowed with 900 million metric tons of bentonic clay.
Despite insecurity?
Insecurity is there because there are no jobs. It's a chicken and egg situation. When people have jobs, they are busy. South Africa was a very clear example of what the mining sector or natural resources sector can do. So have you asked yourself, what are the causes of this insecurity? Is it poverty? Is it hunger? 80% of the times, trust me on this, it is driven by lack. If people are engaged, I mean, look at you now. You don't even have time. I can assure you, maybe you make out time for your service. You're too busy for anybody to want to come and say to you there's a match somewhere. True or false? You're even too tired. So when you engage people, everybody has this energy that you must engage. Okay, if you don't engage that energy, something else engages it. And this is a story, this is a narrative we're refusing. We're calling people insurgents, we're calling people criminals, we're calling people all sorts of names. How many psychiatric centers do we have? How many psychological analyses do we run our citizens to be able to know what triggered that young man into drugs? What triggered that young man into carrying arms against the state? 80% of the time, and I'm going to be, I stand to be corrected on this, it is because that energy that that guy has is not engaged, at least positively.
Now, you know, the technical committee that was inaugurated by the president to look into the pros and cons of the minimum wage, the new minimum wage, they made certain deliberations, suggestions as to how, the government can actually get the money, to pay the Nigerian workers. Now, they suggested that a measure that can be considered is the removal of fuel subsidy. So what do you think is the way forward out of this quagmire? Because, certain Nigerian workers are concerned that will the 30,000 naira be paid? Will it not be paid? Will there be removal of fuel subsidy? If government has said there won't be removal of fuel subsidy. So where do we stand as a nation? Okay,
let's define what a subsidy is. So let's know what it is we have in Nigeria. We don't have subsidy. I've said this severally. What you have is price differential. Now, subsidies are production-based instruments that you give to somebody who is producing, and you give it vis-a-vis probably tax holidays, some instruments here and there, some leeways here and there, some government excuses here and there. The moment you put subsidy on a finished product that already has a tag, you make it price differential. What we are paying is not subsidy. What we are paying is the difference in price between what the seller is selling and what the buyer wants to buy and what the market can afford. That is not subsidy.
So you think that won't help?
No, if you remove the subsidy, let me tell you why you have price increases in fuel prices. One, you have this unstable dollar, exchange rates. So if you remove the subsidy and fuel price hits 300 naira a liter, okay, and you're paying somebody 30,000 naira, and he needs to go to work, you don't have any public transportation for him, he needs to go to work in his vehicle, and it's taking him 18,000 naira to be able to fuel a car he uses for 2 weeks. Haven't you sold a dog to buy a monkey? Have you solved your problem? So these are the facts. These are the issues that we must be very, very, dispassionate in interrogating. Those who say remove fuel subsidy, what is the essence of, as far as I'm concerned, I keep saying this, I've said it a million times, we don't need PMS. It doesn't help us in our economy.
We might have to stop you on that. Thank you so much, economic analyst, Dr. Emeka Okengo. Thank you so much for your time.
Pleasure for having me here.